So Spider-Man 2 is out, and has been for 2 months, and opinions are still flying all over the place. And despite some suit conversation that's it's kind of funny, but also kind of dumb at the same time, it's mainly speculation over whether there will be a DLC, and if there will be, who the main villain will be, since Insomniac has just a ton of loose threads to take care of between Chameleon, Cletus Cassidy, and Kraven's daughter. Not to mention how they'll handle a story with Miles as the main Spider-Man. But that's mostly speculation that'll probably become insignificant in the next few months after the DLC is announced or even released. The conversation I'm most invested in is, will there, or should there even be, a Miles Morales 2? Immediately after finishing the game the first time, I knew that I wanted to talk about this in some capacity, but I didn't want to overload my review of Spider-Man 2 since it was already filled to the brim. And I also wanted to give myself time to ponder on where the second game ends, as well as revisit some of Miles Morales. And after really thinking about it for a few weeks, I would really like to see another small-scale follow-up centered on Miles, as well as Cindy Moon for several reasons. Though yeah, spoilers. Obviously. The ending of the second game, where Peter temporarily goes into retirement as Miles takes over, really has some people bothered. It's not surprising considering the landscape we are with media criticism and just how fucked that is, but very few arguments are valid, while most of it is just thinly veiled racism. Like, this is shit that the character has experienced since his inception. Personally, it's an ending that I'm kind of fine with. It makes sense in the story, although I kind of am getting exhausted of seeing this pass the torch ending repeated between DMC5, Bayonetta 3, and now this. But the difference is the playground the character of Spider-Man has. You have to remember that Miles is still relatively new. He's only existed since 2011. While Spider-Gwen, Spider-Punk, and Penny Parker have all existed for even less time and have become iconic in their own way, mainly thanks to the Spider-Verse films. So Miles really only has roughly 12 years worth of stories to pull from, and a standalone game would give Insomniac a chance to play with some interesting stuff. Specifically, it would allow for the status quo to change for a little while. Something I noted in my Spider-Man 2 review that I really appreciated is that Insomniac doesn't seem like they're too scared to change the playing field for our main characters. So far, the creative team doesn't seem antsy to press that reset button and have MJ and Peter break up again, or bring Aunt May back from the dead or some shit, or even keep every villain alive so that they can return. And with that ending setting up Miles doing his own thing for a while, and with Insomniac doubling down that, in some capacity, Miles is the current main Spider-Man, it'd be kind of nice to see him actually do that for a little bit, as opposed to the opening of Spider-Man 3 just jump right back into Miles and Peter working together again. Because, despite how the news is being reported, I doubt that the third story would ever be told without Peter's involvement, considering how he is kind of connected to every fucking villain. So no, I don't think Miles is flat out replacing Peter. That goes against the entire point of the second game. However, for that ending to not come off as cheap, they do have to stick to their guns. Plus, it'd be nice to see adaptations of some more Miles-centric villains, giving him his own distinct rogues gallery. I'm not too well versed in his comic runs at all, but I do know that he doesn't have very many unique villains, at least in 1610. There's his own Venom, that and Carnage would be a nice cap to the symbiote story, which I'll touch on in a second. Miles has his own Scorpion, and that's kind of it. I know that there's probably not too much you can do with that, which is why the dev team could also bring back some classic villains, at least the few that are, still alive, or make something entirely new. The Tinkerer in Miles Morales was a fundamentally different character, just with the same name, and that would be cool to have an alteration of fucking Tarantula or even Morbius. I mean, the comic spin-offs set in the same universe have covered villains like Swarm and The Hood. Yeah, it's looking like slim pickings here. There's not very many villains Insomniac hasn't adapted yet in some capacity, and out of those, there's not very many available. Lee's good, Tombstone's cool, Otto's locked up, Flint Marco's in rehab, Felicia's out there banging her girlfriend in Paris, Screwball should never fucking return, Kraven's in Harry's stomach, and Shocker, Electro, Scorpion, and Vulture are all fucking dead. So that doesn't leave very much. Except for Taskmaster. Despite showing up on Kraven's iPad at the opening of the game, Taskmaster didn't return in the second game whatsoever, which is really odd since his boss fight in the first game hinted towards someone hunting down Spider-Man. So seeing him come back and study Miles' moves would be a great follow-up to his appearance in the first game. Maybe he's working with Chameleon, I don't fucking know, man. That brings me to the biggest reason why there should be a Miles Morales 2. There are too many loose threads. Between Carnage, Chameleon, Kraven's daughter, Otto, Norman, Harry, the G-Serum, and Cindy Moon, it feels like there's way too much for a third game to try to tackle, even if it was upwards of 30 hours. Even if the DLC takes care of Carnage and or Chameleon, it still doesn't feel like all that can be done in a way that doesn't feel bloated. Maybe it's because I'm a longtime Spider-Man fan, but I've been burned too many times by stories getting overambitious and slipping up in some way, and I don't want that to happen to Spider-Man 3 at all. I understand that these stories are kind of long-ish. 2 came in at about 14 to 15 hours, and that game did a lot. The narrative adapted several stories and managed to make it work out. However, maybe it's just anxiety over not wanting this final game to fall apart, but I'm afraid of whether or not they'll be able to work all these characters into a cohesive narrative. And I gotta be honest, that's mainly due to Cindy Moon. The idea that Silk will be a major part of the third game is insane to me, and is the most exciting thing I can't wait to see. Brian Intihar seems to imply in interviews that the reason they picked her over any other Spider person is that she hasn't really been entirely explored yet. Which makes sense. She was also introduced in 2014, like Spider-Punk and Penny Parker. The only difference is that she hasn't been in a movie outside of a background role in Homecoming, and a spin-off TV series with the same actress set in the Sony universe. Listen, after El Muerto and the shit show that was Silver and Black, I'll believe it when I see it. So unless you're a comic reader or a Spunk fan, shout out to my fellow Madam Web fans, you probably don't know much about the character. Me included, and I would absolutely love to see a trio of Spider people fighting Norman as the Green Goblin. Or maybe they'll adapt the death of Spider-Man, with Cindy taking Miles' place as someone with powers who just sort of stands back and doesn't help, igniting her to take the role as Silk. Will one of them die? I don't fucking know. But whatever they do, it should be fully explored in a smaller, standalone game. That's the only real angle I can see all this working, because telling her origin story on top of tying up the loose ends of Otto and Norman sounds overbearing. A smaller game about her origin mixed with a story about Miles protecting New York alone would work double duty. Since the Miles Morales game did multiple jobs as a blueprint for Miles' gameplay in the sequel, had incremental improvements over the first game that were brought over to the second game, as well as just being something to hold us over for a little bit. And a sequel to 2 could implement some small improvements, as well as be Cindy's blueprint for the third game. I've seen some fan pitches for this game as a cross-dimensional story where Miles and Silk go to different New Yorks, and I'm sorry to break it to you, that kind of defeats the purpose of a standalone game like Miles Morales. It's not that you can't have big stories or change things up in any way, it's that these games, like bottle episodes for TV shows or micro-budget films, are meant to be an experimental testing ground for things that would be glossed over or even cut from a massive sequel, as well as, frankly, making another game that generates a shit ton of profit while keeping development costs low. I love the appeal of smaller games like Infamous First Light or ODST, both of which are amazing games. ODST is my favorite Halo game just due to how different it is while also having restraints on its scope. It's so fucking good. And I really do believe that a follow-up centered on these two characters setting the stage for Spider-Man 3 would be a dream come true. But there's just one teensy little problem, and his name is Wolverine. It's been 2 years since that game's announcement, with very little released or said since then, despite a possible 2024 release date. Even though it's set in the same universe, I don't even count that as a Spider-Man game or Spider-Man adjacent. However, you have to remember that it's still being developed by the same studio, meaning that it'll be using resources that an imagined standalone sequel to Spider-Man 2 could be using as well. So between that and the talks of an apparent Venom spinoff, if fans really want it, I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that Miles Morales 2 with Cindy Moon won't be happening anytime soon. And while I'm at it, I'm also going to vote a no on the solo Venom game. I get that a lot of people want it, especially after Ultimate Spider-Man, especially after he was already made playable in 2. It would be nice, but it really just depends on how Spider-Man 3 ends, I guess. As much as I liked playing as him in Spider-Man 2, I just don't really see the appeal of a Venom game being something that I'd want. Maybe I'm in the minority, but I don't see the appeal of a game solely focused on this version of Venom at all. He's served his purpose as a villain, and I don't really need any more of him. But yeah, that's that's really it. We won't know anything until a DLC happens, Wolverine is released, and from there on, it's whatever the fuck Insomniac decides to do. To be fair, Miles Morales was a surprise release that he just kind of showed up in the state of play, but I don't really have a lot of hope. However, if a story like this happened in any sort of capacity, I would be there day one. Here's crossing my fingers that Insomniac do end up doing some sort of follow-up to mitigate the amount of bloat Spider-Man 3 would end up having, but who knows. Don't forget to share this on... I can't think of one. Ooh, don't forget to share this on Google+. Philippe's got your cock. Philippe's got your cock. Philippe's got your cock, and he sudden moves and the fucker's gone. Oh, he's gonna rip off your penis. Oh, he's gonna rip off your penis. Oh, he's gonna